always been uneasy about the basement in my childhood home. It was unfinished with exposed pipes and a perpetually damp concrete floor. The single dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling did little to dispel the shadows that clung to the corners as a child. I perceived the basement as one of the scariest places I had ever set foot in sight. Turn search all OCR one evening. While my parents were out, I was left to babysit my younger sister Emily. She was 6, full of energy, and always curious. After dinner, she asked if we could play hide and seek. I agreed, thinking it would be a good way to keep her entertained. "Okay, I'll count to 50 and you hide," I said, covering my eyes with my hands. I began counting, listening as Emily's footsteps pattered away. The house was filled with the usual creaks and groans, but as I reached 40, I heard a sound that made me pause, a faint scraping noise like something being dragged across the floor. I uncovered my eyes and looked around. Everything seemed normal, 50 ready or not. "Here I come," I called out, trying to shake off the unease. I searched the usual spots behind the curtains, under the beds, inside closets, but Emily was nowhere to be found. As I approached the basement door, noticed it was slightly ajar. A chill ran down my spine. "Emily," I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response. I hesitated, then opened the door wider. The light switch was at the top of the stairs. I flipped it on and the dim bulb flickered to life, casting long shadows on the walls. I peered down the steps but saw no sign of my sister Emily. "Are you down there?" I called again, straining to hear any movement. Silence. Taking a deep breath, I began to descend the stairs. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound echoing in the confined space. When I reached the bottom, I scanned the room. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, cardboard boxes, and discarded toys. The air was thick with the smell of mildew. "Emily, this is funny," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. As I moved deeper into the basement, I heard a faint giggle coming from behind an old dusty couch. Relief washed over me. "There you are," I said, walking towards the couch. "I found you." But as I rounded the corner, I froze. Emily was standing there, her back to me, staring at the wall. Her hair was matted and her clothes were dirty, as if she'd been playing in the mud. "Emily, what are you doing?" I asked, reaching out to touch her shoulder. She turned slowly to face me, and I gasped. Her eyes were vacant, staring through me as if I wasn't there. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her lips were blue. "Emily," I whispered, fear gripping my heart. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, she raised her hand and pointed towards the far corner of the basement where the shadows were darkest. I turned to look, squinting to see what she was pointing at. At first I saw nothing, but then a shape began to emerge from the dark. A tall, thin figure with elongated limbs and a featureless face. It moved slowly towards us. Its movements jerky and unnatural. Panic surged through me. I grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her towards the stairs. "Run," I shouted, but she resisted, her eyes still fixed on the approaching figure. With all my strength, I lifted her into my arms and bolted up the stairs. The creature's footsteps echoed behind us, growing louder with each passing second. I reached the top of the stairs and slammed the door shut, locking it. I sat Emily down and looked into her eyes. They were still vacant, but she seemed to be coming back to herself. "Are you okay?" I asked, shaking her gently. She blinked a few times, then nodded slowly. "What happened down there?" I demanded, but she just shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. I hugged her tightly, my own heart racing. I didn't know what that thing in the basement was, but I knew one thing for certain: we were never going down there again. That night I tucked Emily into bed and sat by her side until she fell asleep. I couldn't shake the image of that figure from my mind. Every creak of the house made me jump, and I found myself constantly glancing towards the basement door, half expecting it to burst open the next morning. I told my parents what had happened. They dismissed it as an overactive imagination tale, insisting that the basement was perfectly safe. But I knew better. Something was down there, something that had taken hold of my sister. Even if only for a moment. From that day on, I avoided the basement at all costs. I made sure Emily never went down there again, and I kept the door locked at all times. But sometimes late at night, I would hear faint footsteps coming from below, and I would lie awake praying that whatever was down there would stay confined to the darkness. Years later, after we had moved out of that house, I heard that the new owners had sealed off the basement entirely. They claimed it was due to structural issues, but I couldn't help but wonder if they had encountered the same terror that I had. To this day, I can't enter a basement without feeling a cold shiver run down my spine. a reminder of the darkness that lurks just beneath the surface. Growing up, I always thought my high school was a typical old building. It had 4 levels, or so I thought. The top 3 were above. Ground and the basement hosted the engineering classes, but during my senior year I discovered something that has haunted me ever since it started on a mundane afternoon. School had ended at 2 p.m. But I had a club meeting at 2:45 with nothing to do. I wandered the halls bored and aimless. Then I had an idea: sneak onto one of the school elevators. Students weren't supposed to use them, but a friend had shown me a trick to bypass the lock. With a quick maneuver, I was in the elevator. Was surprisingly nice, better than the rest of the building. The walls were polished, and the tiles on the floor. I pressed a few buttons out of curiosity. That's when I noticed something unusual. A crack below the button panel. Tapping on it, I realized it was hollow. My curiosity got the better of me, and I pried it open. Behind it was a hidden button, one that wasn't meant to be seen. I hesitated. Should I press it? My rational side said no, but the lure of mystery was too strong. I pushed it. The elevator descended slower than normal, as if traveling farther than it should. When the doors finally opened, I stepped into a dimly lit hallway that felt trapped in another era. The air smelled faintly of dust and old books. Directly in front of me stood a vending machine from the 1970s. Curiously, it still worked. I inserted $1 and out. Popped a glass Coke bottle, not a modern remake, but an original. I couldn't believe my luck. This is incredible, I whispered to myself. Marveling at the relic ahead of me were 3 hallways. Left, right, and straight. I chose straight, my steps echoing in the silence. The hallway was lined with classrooms. Peering into the windows, I saw desks arranged neatly as if waiting for students. Dust free, untouched. By time, I felt like I had stepped into a preserved moment. The teacher names on the doors and the faded posters on the walls whispered of a forgotten era. As I explored aloud, bell rang, jolting me. It wasn't the buzz of our modern system, but the clear metallic clang of an old school bell. I checked my phone. It was 2:50 p.m. The upstairs bell wasn't due to ring for another 10 minutes. Confused, I wondered how this floor connected to the school above. There were no stairs, no other way down except the elevator. Curiosity shifted into unease. When I saw the lockers, I opened one and found a backpack inside. Its contents: untouched notebooks, pencils, a tattered lunchbox. Other lockers were the same, as if students had abandoned them mid-year. Why hadn't anyone cleared them out? A creeping dread began to settle in, but I wasn't ready to leave. I opened a classroom door, stepping into what appeared to be a history room. A globe sat on the teacher's desk, and the blackboard displayed faded notes. I walked toward the desk, but a sound froze me. Footsteps. I ducked behind the desk, heart pounding. The steps grew louder, stopping just outside the door. "Did you open this door?" Timothy, an older man's voice, asked. "No, sir," replied a teenager. "Back to class," the man ordered. I waited, expecting the door to open, but it didn't. When I peeked out from under the desk, no one was there. The hallway was empty. My hands trembled as I slipped out, heading for the elevator. But before I reached it, a man appeared down the hall, his back to me. "And where might you be going, lad?" he asked as he turned. His piercing eyes locking onto mine. He looked like he belonged in the 1970s. Dressed in a suit and tie, his hair neatly combed. "I need to get upstairs," I stammered. "There is no upstairs," he replied sharply. "This is the only floor in the school." My screamed to run, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Can you show me the exit?" He gestured down the hall, leading me away from the elevator. But I could see there was no exit where he pointed. The moment he turned, I bolted toward the elevator. As I passed one of the classrooms, I glanced inside. It was full of students and a teacher, people who hadn't been there moments ago. Their heads snapped toward me. Their faces pale and lifeless. Panic surged through me as I smashed the elevator button repeatedly. The man was running toward me, now his face twisted with rage. I fled down a side hall away and ducked into a classroom, locking the door behind me. Turning around, I saw a boy standing at the far end of the room, blank, his smile unnatural and unsettling. "Do you want to play?" he asked, his voice distorted. I yanked the door open and ran. The hallway was now alive with figures, students and teachers, all chasing me, chanting, "Join us down here." The elevator finally arrived. I jumped in, slamming the closed door button. As they rushed toward me, the boy reached for me, his hand nearly breaching the gap before the door shut. The Silence that followed was deafening when the elevator reached the first floor. I ran to my car without looking back. My phone said it was 3:30. Frantically, I opened my photo gallery only to find the pictures I'd taken were gone the next day. I tried showing my friends the elevator, but the hidden button was gone. The crack in the frame repaired. Security escorted us out before we could investigate further. To this day, I don't know what I stumbled into. An abandoned floor, a time slip, something else entirely. All I know is I'll never set foot in that school again. I'd always been skeptical of the supernatural, dismissing ghost stories as mere products of overactive imaginations. That was until I moved into a quaint century-old house nestled in the heart of Salem, Massachusetts. The charm of its antique architecture and the historic location were irresistible. Little did I know this house held secrets that would forever alter my perception of reality. From the moment I crossed the threshold, and an inexplicable unease settled over me. The air inside was heavy, carrying a musty scent that hinted at decades of untold stories. Each creak of the floorboard seemed to whisper secrets, and the walls appeared to watch my every move. I attributed these sensations to the quirks of an old house and the overactive imagination of someone. Adjusting to a new environment, the basement, however, was a different matter. Entirely. A narrow wooden door at the end of the hallway led to a steep staircase descending into darkness. The single dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling did little to dispel the shadows that clung to the corners. I avoided the basement as much as possible, using it only to store seldom used items. Every time I ventured down, an oppressive feeling of dread would wash over me, as if eyes were observing my every move. One stormy evening, as rain battered the windows and thunder rumbled in the distance, the power went out. Armed with a flashlight, I reluctantly made my way to the basement to check the circuit breaker. The beam of light sliced through the darkness, revealing the cold, damp stone walls and the clutter of forgotten belongings. As I approached the breaker panel, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I had the unmistakable sensation of being watched, so I hurriedly flipped the necessary switches, and the lights flickered back to life. Relieved, I turned to ascend the stairs when my flashlight caught something unusual. In the far corner of the basement, partially obscured by an old sheet, stood a large, ornate mirror. I didn't recall seeing it during my previous trips downstairs. Curiosity piqued. I approached the mirror, noting the intricate carving that adorned its frame. The glass was cloudy with age, reflecting a distorted image. The basement. As I stood before the mirror, a sudden chill filled the air. My reflection seemed off. The room behind me appeared darker in the mirror than in reality, and there was a faint, almost imperceptible movement in the shadows. I leaned in closer, squinting to make out any details, when a flash of lightning illuminated the room. In that brief moment, I saw it, a figure standing just behind me, its face obscured by darkness. I spun around, heart pounding, but the basement was empty. The only sound was the steady drip of water from a leaky pipe. I turned back to the mirror, but the figure was gone. Dismissing it as a trick of the light and my overactive imagination, I hurried upstairs, firmly closing the basement door behind me. That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak of the house, every hour of the wind set my nerves on edge. I couldn't shake the image of the figure in the mirror. Determined to put my mind at ease, I decided to research the history of the house. At the local library, I discovered that the house had once belonged to a man named Samuel Harrington, a reclusive artist known for his eccentricities. Neighbors had often reported strange noises and lights coming from the house at odd hours. Harrington had vanished without a trace in the late 1800s, and the house had stood vacant for years before being sold. Intrigued, I dug deeper, uncovering old newspaper articles that spoke of seances and attempts to contact the spirit world within the house. One article mentioned a mirror that Harrington believed was a portal to the other side. My blood ran cold. Could it be the same mirror in my basement? That evening, I descended into the basement once more, this time with a sense of purpose. I stood before the mirror, its surface now eerily clean, reflecting my apprehensive expression. Taking a deep breath, I spoke aloud. "Samuel Harrington, are you here for a moment?" There was nothing but silence. Then the temperature dropped sharply and the light bulb above me flickered in the mirror. The shadows behind me began to coalesce, forming the unmistakable outline of a man. I wanted to turn around to run, but my body was frozen in place. The figure in the mirror stepped closer, its features becoming clearer. A gaunt face with hollow eyes stared back at me. A look of longing etched into its expression. "Help me," a voice whispered. though no lips moved, summoning every ounce of courage. I asked, "What do you want?" The figure raised, a hand pointing to the corner of the basement where the mirror had originally stood. As I followed its gesture, the light bulb shattered, plunging the room into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, hands trembling, and when I finally managed to turn it on, the basement was empty. The mirror stood alone, its surface now cracked. I never ventured into the basement again. Shortly after, I sold the house, unable to bear the weight of its haunted history. To this day I am
Hunted.